I'd like to welcome everybody to the our first meeting, Millage Committee meeting for the 2020 calendar year. And just to, I'm not going to introduce all the names. They're going to be shown on the screen in just a few minutes, but I would like to take time to introduce the co-chair, Philip Callaway, who is, we've agreed that we're going to share the co-chairing duties of the meeting. So I'll take this meeting. Phil will do the next meeting, and we'll just rotate back and forth through the 4 meetings that we have scheduled. I think we've got introductions of all the members. All the members that are on the committee are next up. So if you can show that slide, so that everybody can see who all the committee members are. As you can see, wide representation throughout our community, both business, nonprofit, as well as connections from our municipalities. So good representation here, I believe, and thanks to the Board of Education for selecting all these great committee members and getting them to join. What I would say is, here's the charge, the committee charge. The Columbus City Schools Board of Education hereby charges this committee with reviewing the strategic plan, academic needs, operational requirements, and financial condition of the district, and make a recommendation to the Board of Education on the appropriateness of a levy and/or bond question, including form and amount, to be placed on the November 2020 general election ballot. So that's our charge. I think a lot of other things can come up during these meetings, but you can debate whether or not we should put something on the ballot in November, whether or not the city's ready, in spite of what's going on. But I think our charge is really just to make the recommendation, which we should do in the 4th meeting, to the board, and let them decide if they want to go forward with our recommendations, if they want to place it on the ballot. But that will be their charge. There are a lot of unknowns, and we can discuss all of those unknowns at Libium. And I think what we know is what we know today, and hopefully over the next few meetings we'll learn more. But that will be the information that will be included. You can see the meeting schedule. Today is we've just introduced everybody. We will discuss facilities. We'll continue that facilities discussion into the next meeting. The 3rd meeting on May 11th, we'll get into the academic operations. And then on the 4th meeting, May 18th, we should be ready for recap and make a recommendation to the board with the amount of millage, or if we have a millage, or however we decide that we want to take that forward. So at this time, I would like to introduce the board president, Jennifer Adair, and have her begin opening comments before she turns it over.
Thank you so much. And I want to again thank our co-chairs, Jordan Miller and Phil Callaway, for agreeing to lead this effort. And I want to thank each of you who's sitting on this committee. Each of you is very important. You represent the people of Columbus. You represent our students, our parents, our businesses, our nonprofits, our very important partners. And each of you is very important to this process. So I hope that as we go through and you learn a lot of information, it's going to be a lot of information, you take notes, you ask questions, and you take that after each meeting and go back and talk to your constituents, talk to those you represent, because it is so important that everyone is involved in how we go forward. You are not a rubber stamp. You are very important to the process, and your recommendation will carry weight with the Board of Education. I want to ask my board member, Michael Cole, if he has anything to say to you before we get started.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you all so much for being here. You're playing a very critical role in some important decisions that we're poised to make in the future. All else has been stated. I just look forward to hearing your feedback and gleaning your insights. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Board Member Cole. And one last thing, committee, you will be hearing, like I said, a lot of information, and we've segmented it hopefully in categories. We want to try to stay within the category, but if you have a really important question, we can keep track of those and kind of pin those to a parking lot so that we can make sure to get back to it when we're discussing it. So some of you, for example, might have a lot of academic type questions. That isn't the topic for today, but I'm sure those questions are important and we want to make sure we do capture them so you don't forget. So at this point, other than the thank you on behalf of the entire Board of Education, I will turn it over to our treasurer, Stan Bahorik, who will be facilitating us through this meeting.
Okay, thank you, President Adair. And I'd like to begin by introducing you to your presenters this afternoon. I will lead us off and do several sections of the presentation. And I'm joined by Alex Trevino. Some of you have heard Alex present before. He's our Director of Capital Improvements. As President Adair mentioned to you, we're going to present a lot of information, most of it kind of basic to start with and very high level overview of district facilities issues today. And so we'll start with, I believe we'll start with kind of a primer on some public school funding issues, just so that you have a basic understanding of how property taxes work, what it means to the district, how we ultimately get around to calculating a property tax request. So you need just some basic math, if you will, underlying all of that. The property tax calculation is fairly simple and straightforward. In its simplest form, it's assessed valuation times the tax rate equals the dollars that are generated. While I do this at the macro level across the entire district, you can do this on your own property tax bill. When you get that and you want to look at that, you can see your own assessed valuation and just do that math and see if the tax bill is calculated correctly. For definitional purposes, assessed valuation, or you'll hear me refer to it many times as AV. In the state of Ohio, all real property is assessed at 35% of true or market value. True or market value is typically best defined by an arm's length transaction, but it is the county auditor's duty every year to set those values, but every 3 years and 6 years, he does the triennial update and the full reappraisal, as we're all very familiar with, where all the parcels are individually looked at and a value is set. So 35% of true market value. For Columbus schools, our assessed valuation across the entire district is $10.4 billion, that's with a B, $10.4 billion in assessed valuation. And that's for tax year 2019, collection year 2020. You should note that taxes are assessed on a value in 1 year, but collected for the next. So that value is as of January 1, 2019. And that was given to us in the fall of 2019. It was determined by then. And then the bills that go out in early 2020, and then again here soon, are based upon that value. That assessed value is equal to approximately $29.7 billion in true or fair market value. Our tax rates are stated in terms of mills. It's kind of an odd little creature, but we refer to it as 1 mil, or however many mills are being assessed. And 1 mil is equal to 1/10 of 1%, or mathematically in decimal form, it's 0.001. So when we get around to answering the question, which is typically asked, what does 1 mil of property tax generate for Columbus schools? You just fill in the equation, the district assessed valuation of 10.4 billion times 1 mil, or times 0.001. And you'll hear me say that 1 mil generates about $10.4 million per year. One of the interesting things in Ohio is the House Bill 920 effect. House Bill 920 was passed back in the 70s, and it prohibits the tax dollars generated from any levy from increasing anytime the assessed valuation grows due to inflation. Back in the 70s, there were some pretty high inflation in residential property values, and tax bills are going up accordingly. The legislature passed this bill to prevent that from happening. So as you can imagine, in that simple mathematical formula, where A times B always has to equal C, if A goes up and C can't change, B has to go down. So for Columbus schools, our current operating levies, we have 9 of them in effect. They were voted at a maximum rate of 72.17 mils over time. But currently, for this collection period, they are levied at an effective rate of 35.8 mils. So that levy millage has been reduced over time based upon inflationary increases in property values to generate the same dollars they did in the first year that they were levied. There are other things. This is just a very simplistic look at it, but there are other issues going on with valuations like new construction, where we do receive additional property taxes, and we do have what's called unvoted or inside millage of 4.51 mils, and there is inflationary growth there, but it's very small relative to the overall millage rate that is levied. To give you an idea of what our tax rates are now for this collection period, we have an effective rate of 40.3 mils, and that again, that includes the 4.5 inside, 4.4 in debt service, and 0.80 in permanent improvement millage. And you'll see the permanent improvement levies are also subject to the 920, House Bill 920 rollback. So that really is 2 different levies, 2 half-mil levies for the district. And so that 1 total mill is now being levied only at 0.8 mils. Debt service is set a little bit different. Debt service is set strictly upon the debt service schedule that we have to meet, the payments that we have to meet. So there's no 920 impact here. It's simply whatever the debt service is that we have to pay that year. And you look at and divide that by the assessed valuation to determine the millage that's required. And this year we need about 4.4 mils to pay our outstanding debt service. We're often asked when we get into these conversations about the cost to the homeowner. So I've listed here several different market value scenarios for you so that you can see what the current tax bill is for folks at different market values. You can see the market value of 100,000, which is often a typical a level that you hear quoted by any school district. $100,000 market value is $35,000 in assessed value, and if you do the math, you'll see that generates each piece of that $1,412 in operating, $154 towards bonds, and $28 towards the permanent improvements, for a total tax bill of about $1,594. That tax bill is subject to other factors like homestead exemption in some cases and other credits. But in general, again, at a very high level, simple approach, that's how tax bills are calculated and what they look like for a variety of different levels of property values in the district. Moving on to how the district administration goes through the budget and forecast and appropriation process, I thought I would outline for you this typical cycle that we follow. And you can start anywhere in this cycle you like, but let's start at the kind of the right-hand side there where it says January to April budget preparation. Our budget director, Scott Gooding, runs all the budget directors and managers through this process of developing budgets, not just for the upcoming fiscal year, but for an additional 4 years out, for a total of a 5-year budget preparation process where they identify where the needs are, what the plans are for spending money, how that aligns with district objectives and the work that they have to do in their various areas. And that process typically runs in the, like I said, show here in the January to April timeframe. And that data feeds into our May forecast, which is upcoming right now. After that, we adopt an appropriations resolution in June. Subsequent to that, the fiscal year starts July 1. And right after that, we look at the May forecast and we start to prepare the November forecast, and we look at our appropriations and get those in alignment. And then we get up to November. This used to be October, but the state law changed in the last year or two, so that we file the forecast in November now. And then we prepare the November forecast. And it's in November when we roll back 1 year in the forecast. 1 year that was projected becomes actual. For instance, in this November of 2020, fiscal year 20 will become actual instead of projected, and fiscal 25 will roll into the projection period, and and replace fiscal 24 as the last year in the projection. That's the general cycle that we go through from a calendar basis. And as you can see here, our forecast as well as our budget and appropriation documents follow the same process of there's a preparation period of time, there's a review by the Finance and Appropriations Committee. They are both presented to the Board of Education and then subsequently adopted by that board. And we end up at the end of this process with an appropriations on one hand and a 5-year forecast on the other. One of the important numbers that we look at and watch in our forecast, because we do operate on a cash basis accounting system, we watch ending cash balance, fiscal year ending cash balance, and it's the trend in this cash balance that gives us an idea of where we kind of are headed financially. And there are certain early indicators about when we need to do things like commission a millage committee like we have now to discuss the possibility of putting a tax levy on the ballot. This being from the November forecast, the 4 years of the forecast are projected from 2020 to 2024, but it also includes these 3 years of actual expenditures. So our forecast is really this 8-year period from fiscal year 2017 through fiscal year 2024. I like to, and have been doing that since I've been doing this since I arrived to the district back in 2014. I like to extend that out an additional 3 years so that I encompass at least an 8-year period, because typically school districts are about a 4-year levy cycle. So I want to make sure I cover all 4 years of at least 2 levy cycles so that we have the best picture we have for financial planning. There are a couple of key indicators that we watch on cash balance. The first is, when do we begin to have revenues not meet expenditures? That is, when do expenditures start to exceed revenues and we see a decline in cash balance? In the November forecast, that year is fiscal 21. Next fiscal year, you see it begins to decline. And once that decline begins, unless something happens, we do something differently, that decline will continue. And by the shape of that curve, you can see that it accelerates. One of the other indicators that we watch is when we drop below 30 days cash balance. This gold line right here is 30 days cash. It's kind of an industry-wide accepted best practice to have that as your target. Every time I do a forecast, I remind people that my target is not 0, because we don't want to manage to 0. We want to manage to no less than 30 days cash. So you can see historically, we've done pretty well with that. So that's another indicator that we need to do something different. When I say do something different, school districts have one of 3 things they can do to change this trend in cash balance. One, you can increase revenues. And as you can see, because of 920, the only real significant increase in revenues that we can achieve through property taxes is by placing an issue before the voters for an additional tax levy. 2, we can reduce expenditures. Or 3, we can do a combination of both. And typically school districts cycle through attempting to increase revenues and either being successful or not successful, and then possibly having to go through expenditure reductions. And sometimes we'll be able to build, when you're building a program, you have to make sure that your revenues can keep up with that and sustain that building and program. So we're reasonably limited in what we can do on the revenue side, and that's why we're here today. The other indicator is actually the first year that we go negative. Quite frankly, that really can never happen. We're not permitted to go into a deficit like that. So if we are faced with that and don't have additional revenue sources that have been approved, we would certainly be in a situation of having to cut expenditures in order to keep from going negative. The other issue about negative balances, negative forecasted balances in the 5-year forecast is when does the Ohio Department of Education, or ODE, when does ODE send you a letter or give you a call and ask you questions about what are you going to do about this deficit? When it's out here in the 5th year of your forecast, we won't get a call. But as it moves this way, when it gets earlier and earlier and begins to appear maybe 2 years out, that's when we're going to get a notice from ODE that they're going to expect a plan to rectify that deficit. So that we try to avoid that if at all possible. So you know a little bit about levy timing. Back in calendar year 2016, when we were on the ballot in November, November of 16 actually is right at the very beginning of fiscal year 17. So we were voting halfway through that fiscal year. And I will show you how those taxes begin to flow when you vote in November. But much of this increase right here in the cash balance was due to that new levy being approved. And assuming that it's a 4-year levy cycle, that 2016 voted tax levy would be intended to fund 4 fiscal years, 2018, 19, 20, and 21. And as you can see, we've managed pretty well. We're positive certainly, and we're above the 30-day cash balance. So we've managed within that 2016 levy. Were we to appear on the ballot this fall in 20, which is right at the very beginning, the first half of fiscal year 21, the 4 years it would be intended to fund are 22 through 25. And this is a good reason why I trend this an additional 3 years, because if you were only to look at the forecast out to here, you'd be looking at an $84 million deficit that we would be discussing. But instead, with the trend and knowing that 25 is the year we have to cover, when we start talking about a levy in 20, we really are looking at this $227 million forecasted deficit, not the previous year that in the official forecast hasn't even yet appeared. So I did this presentation to the Finance and Appropriations Committee back in January, and it met with some popular acceptance, and I was asked to do it again. And this is intended to help you understand just the timing of when taxes are collected from a new levy and why you want to plan well in advance of any projected deficit, and also why it's important to have those extra 3 years being trended out for us for planning purposes. So this is a very simple example of the columns are calendar years, calendar year 20 through calendar year 27. And then I highlight the fiscal years because we operate on a fiscal year of July 1 to June 30. So the latter half of calendar year 20 and the first 6 months of calendar year 21 constitute our fiscal year 21. So as you can see in this example, I begin with a sample deficit, and I just did this in millions of dollars. We begin with a deficit projected at 200 million out here in 2025. And in order to figure out how do you cover that with a property tax levy, you simply have to count the number of collection periods. We have first half and we have second half collections, 2 per calendar year. And I've just counted them out here for you. So from the time that we vote in November of 20, we get first half collection in the beginning of calendar year 21. And we have a total of 9 collection periods before we get to that deficit point right here at June 30 of 2025. So cover 200 million by 9 collection periods, you need about 22.2 million per collection period. You get 2 per year, so we need 44 total for the year. As I said before, and I just rounded this down for simplify the math, generating 10 million per year per mill leads me to say we need 4.4 mills to cover a $200 million deficit out 9 collection periods from now. The next question is, what happens if you wait, or what happens if you're not successful at the ballot and a request for an increase in taxes fails? My next example moves the vote from November of 21, or from November of 20 to November of 21. So we're right in the middle of fiscal year 22. Same deficit, only this time it's not 9 collection periods away, it's 7 collection periods away. And as you can imagine, that means I have to raise more per period. I have to raise more on an annual amount. And instead of 4.4 mils, I now need 5.7 mils to cover that deficit. All of this is not to draw your attention to those actual numbers, but it's really to draw your attention to the need to plan ahead, and that waiting or being unsuccessful at an operating levy request, it has its consequences. And so if we want to try and minimize millage, it's best to address those needs as soon as possible. And as events transpire that don't permit us to collect those additional dollars, there are some ramifications in terms of the ultimate cost and or the need to switch over to the alternative that I mentioned before to address a deficit, and that is a combination of revenue increases and expenditure reductions. So let's now talk about how we're going to frame this discussion. We've talked a little bit about just kind of tax rates and property taxes in general, its timing, and why the need for long-term planning and doing things a little bit as early as you can. I want to now frame our discussion around the needs of the district. And when I look at this, I look at 3 budget buckets, if you will. One is our general operations, and the other 2 have to do with facilities, or what others might call a capital budget. On the general operating side, this is what you think about our day-to-day operations. It's the implementation of our academic plan. It involves hiring staff to execute that plan, providing supplies and materials and equipment to use in our general operation, and pay for things like the utilities and heat, water, and light. When we get over on the capital side, in the middle and the right-hand column, you'll see that we have Lifecycle Replacement, which is a kind of an ongoing, shorter-term, immediate need capital budget, if you will. And then we have a longer-term Facilities Master Plan operation that is typically just a longer-term perspective, oftentimes larger dollar amounts involved there as well. Under Lifecycle Replacement, we're talking about replacing buses and vehicles. As you know, buses don't last forever, and we should be replacing them pretty much on about a 10-year replacement cycle. We've got ongoing building maintenance that needs to be taken care of. We need to replace equipment throughout the district as well, not only classroom and educational equipment, but custodial and maintenance equipment as well. And under Lifecycle Replacement, certainly we need to think about computers as well. They have a useful life to them as well, not only in terms of the physical computer, but also in terms of the software that runs on those computers. The Facility Master Plan is quite a process, and this is where we do get some state funding for these projects. OFCC, Ohio Facilities Construction Commission, I believe is what that stands for, and they provide some co-funding to the district for these projects, and we've had several of those in the past. And this is where we'll be talking about our legacy buildings that haven't been touched with any OFCC funding yet. We'll also, when you get into this facility master plan discussion, this is where we talk about building capacity and utilization, and we talk about feeder patterns. So you can tell from here my rather high level generic terms that I've used, capacity, utilization, and feeder patterns. You know that those are often very sensitive topics for any district when we talk about where do your children go to school, how does that feed on up into the middle and the high school, how many schools do we have, how big should those schools be, and so on. So these are the budget buckets that I will kind of focus this discussion on, our future discussion on. And within that, let me just review for you where are the funding sources that help pay for these operations and these capital needs. Well, you all know that we do get state aid, and some of that state aid goes into general operations. For our general operating fund, about 36 or 37% of our overall operating needs are met by state aid. State aid, as I mentioned, in terms of OFCC monies, the co-funding also helps fund the facility master plan. But we don't really get any state aid for our life cycle replacement needs. There are also state and federal grants that we apply for and receive and are eligible for. Those grants are much more restrictive in use, but generally provide for supplemental services in our general operations. But again, more restricted than our state aid and our next source of revenue, which is the one that we'll be focusing on, and that's property taxes. And property taxes feed into all of these budget buckets, our operations, our life cycle replacement, and our facility master plan. So that kind of gets us up to speed with some basic financial concepts, some basic planning concepts that we go through, how, at least from an operating tax levy, those taxes are collected and when they're available to fund our operations. But today, what we're going to be doing is focusing on facilities, which will be the right-hand two columns of this chart. And we're going to begin by discussing the facilities master plan part of this and see what all is involved there, what's been our history in facility master planning, and what some of the projects have been, and what our experience has been, and what's it take to really put together a facility master plan. This is where Alex Trevino is going to step in and begin this conversation with our definition of what a facility master plan is, and then take us through some of the history and the experience we've had with this and where we stand today. Alex, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Bohork. So yeah, so just kind of want to give you some background on facility master planning. And so here's kind of just a general description of what a master plan is. So it is a comprehensive living document. And we like to always stress that it's a living document because of the need to adapt with changes that'll come along with time. It's designed to develop and communicate the process to change the district's school facilities to better accommodate and support its current and future educational programs. It serves as a guide for assessing the need for facility improvements and the capital investments required to implement them. So now I just want to give you some historical background of the district's specific experience with facility master planning. So at the time, the district was originally considering its first facility master plan back in 2002. It's noteworthy that the only significant construction the district had undertaken at that time was the 2001 renovation of the Woodcrest Elementary facility, and then the planning for the new Linden Elementary building, which ultimately opened in 2004 and became the district's model for the facilities master plan work. So during that period of 1977 to 2001, there was no significant construction in the district. And then, as Mr. Bohork referred to, the Ohio School Facilities Commission was formed in 1997, and it obviously played a very pivotal role in the not only the planning, but also the funding of school district construction across the state of Ohio. And in 2000, the district, through the Ohio School Facilities Commission, contracted for the development of the district's first master facilities framework. The plan was developed to be a comprehensive, long-range facilities plan based on the learning needs of students, the principle of schools as community centers, and developed with the participation of the community. So at the time that work was initiated, the district was operating at 144 school facilities and serving 65,000 students. You can imagine that was a pretty large endeavor to initiate that much planning. So to facilitate, the district at that time was broken into 6 planning areas that represented roughly the west, south, east, northeast, northwest, and central city areas. And in the graphic you see on this slide, you're seeing the northeast planning area, which was referred to as Area 2 at that time. In 2001, a consortium of engineering and architecture firms working under the direction of the OSFC and a construction manager performed a facility condition assessment of all district academic facilities based on the guidelines that were established by the OSFC. And the objective was to identify and provide cost estimates for renovation and/or replacement of major building systems, as well as determining the overall physical conditions and educational adequacy ratings of the classroom facilities. The results of the assessments was an FCI, or Facilities Condition Index, for each facility. The results generally concluded that our CCS facilities were cramped, they had aging infrastructure. At that time, 14 of those schools were over 100 years of age, with another 26 between 75 and 100 years of age, and there were no schools less than 25 years old. It was also reported that the district was operating 118 temporary modular classroom facilities, and that 89 elementary schools did not have separate gymnasium and cafeteria facilities. Major repairs and system replacements were recommended for heating, ventilation, air conditioning systems, roofs, electrical systems, plumbing and fixtures, interior lighting, and ADA accessibility upgrades. So with the decision to undertake facility master planning, a steering committee was formed. And as part of that steering committee's work, 15 community meetings were held. And significant recommendations from that series of meetings included local community involvement. So a dedicated effort to continue the involvement and an oversight and decision-making activities associated with implementation. There was a real focus on historically significant school buildings and considering the importance of maintaining community identity and cultural history through preservation of historically significant structures. Special needs students incorporate planning to accommodate the physical and educational needs of students with disabilities, including support spaces and barrier-free design. Collaborative planning. Continue the district's history of collaborative arrangements, including the community and district partners. Again, I refer to it being a flexible and plan that we need updating. So acknowledgement that this FMP would be a living document that would need adjusted over the course of its implementation. And finally, education. A real focus on the fact that the FMP in and of itself does not substitute for high quality educational programming, and facilities in and of themselves will not increase academic performance. So in June of 2002, the Board of Education was presented with and approved the district's first comprehensive facilities master plan. In order to manage a very ambitious master plan, the projects were broken into 7 segments. And a segment represents a period of time, which would be roughly 2 years based on OSFC guidelines. Those segments were envisioned to be completed over 15 years, and at that time were contemplated to incorporate 130 facilities. Along the way, some pretty major course corrections were made based on district enrollment, dropping from that 65,000 in 2002 to roughly 55,000 in 2008 to the roughly 51,000 students we serve today. During that same time, over 40 schools have been closed and/or consolidated, and today the district operates at 110 academic sites. The district's last 10-year enrollment projection, completed in 2016, indicated enrollment projections would remain stable through 2026. The OSFC's cost-sharing formula dictates that local voters would be required to cover 70% of the cost of each construction project, while the state would pick up 30% of those costs. In November of 2002, voters approved a local bond issue funding segments 1 and 2 of the plan. Segments 1 and 2 incorporated a total of 35 projects. Also included was funding for a warm, safe, and dry program that included a total of 41 projects to tackle roof replacement and boiler replacement projects that were needed at that time to extend the projected life of those facilities until the facility master plan work was complete. In 2008, voters approved a second bond issue, which funded segment 3 for an additional 11 projects. In total, 46 projects and 24,681 student seats have been built or renovated through the district's facility master plan. In June of 2016, the Board of Education was presented with and approved an update to the original 2002 facility master plan. At this point, this work is on hold pending new funding. And then, as many of you know, in November of 2016, the Board of Education did seek approval for a $125 million bond issue to tackle deferred maintenance across our district. When we consider thinking about the facility master plan work going forward, some of the items that we need to think about would include, number one, educational vision, and what changes, updates to the educational vision might we consider. Partnerships, considering co-locating, co-developing, or additional focus on private partnerships that might include aspects such as health and wellness and social emotional programming. Potentially rethinking our approach to career technical education and adult education. And finally, just the general strategy that we might use in terms of operating across the city, given our size. And with that, I'll hand it back to you, Mr. Treasurer.
Thank you. Let me just say a little bit about the November or the 2016 levy planning that was going on. We were really talking in 2016 about a couple of different options. We had some operating needs that were on the table, and then we had the update to the facility master plan, and then we had the issue with some deferred maintenance items, fairly large volume of deferred maintenance items that ultimately ended up as Operation Fixit. So we had to consider, and the board had to consider, how to put those pieces and parts together. And as Alex just explained to you, we went through a process to update that master plan, and at the end of the day, decided not to pursue that particular bond issue, but we did turn and address those more near-term deferred maintenance items and the operating needs in a kind of a three-part levy of operating, permanent improvement, and a bond issue. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But one of the key things in 2016 was the time frame in which we conducted that facility master plan. I believe we started in January and concluded that in late May, early June for the board's consideration. And that was really a condensed time frame. And that's what I want to go over with you next in terms of what does a facility master plan process really look like over time. And so I put together this timetable along with Alex helping me to identify the critical steps in the process and the typical time that one might allot to each one of these steps that begin with hiring a consultant to help guide you through the process, all the way down to actually opening a school that's been newly built or renovated. And the timetable includes both both calendar year and fiscal year, so you can see how that overlay works. And as you can see here from the dates, Alex and I began to prepare this back in February when we thought this millage committee would be meeting beginning in March. Unfortunately, all of that has been delayed. So you can kind of ignore the actual dates that are here, but the point is to get an idea of the scope of time that it takes to address all the issues in a facility master plan and then execute on that plan. So as you can see here, you begin with about 3 months of looking for a consultant and another period of time for about 12 months to engage with the community as to what that facility master plan would look like. And as you can see, the various steps move on out. We're now out at least 2 years from when you start the process, and we're just beginning to go on the ballot and seek approval from OFCC for the various segments that we would get involved in. Design, assuming that all goes well and you do have funding, the design phase begins about 28 months out from when you first started. And then you can see here the construction really doesn't begin for at least about 3.5 years out, and continues on until about 5 years out, to where you then begin to move in and you can actually open a school somewhere out around month 67. The purpose of this is just to give you a scope of what it takes to prepare that facility master plan and actually get something in the ground and get children in a renovated or newly built building. So you can see here that it's pretty much 5 years from start to finish on a facility master plan. So that it concludes our discussion about that part of our capital needs. Those are the longer term needs that will be addressed by building construction or building renovation. These are the ones that are typically funded through a bond issue, a long-term bond issue that where you're borrowing funds for 20 to 30 years to pay that off, similar to a home mortgage. And just to give you an idea of what is all involved and how long it takes to reach fruition here. The purpose of that is to then make a recommendation to you. It's my recommendation. I suppose I could say it's the staff's recommendation, but it's up to me to kind of help lead you in this direction. But at this point, knowing what I know about facility master planning, and now that you've heard what's all in the process, it comes down to, I guess, our first recommendation that this committee would, at the end, recommend to the board that they begin the process to update and renew the district's facility master plan, and have as a goal of placing a bond issue to fund that plan somewhere in the future. It takes a long time, as you can see, to get this going, and we think we ought to start on that because of the needs that we have at this point in time. I'm going to pause for a moment to take a breather and let people ask questions. Either members of the committee, I've not been watching the chat, but if there are any comments or questions about the FMP, let's stop and see if we can address those before we continue on. So I'll turn this back to Jordan and see if there are any questions.
Okay, I think the floor is open for questions. There's quite a bit of information, obviously. Does anybody have anything that comes to mind want to ask about? I think what's on the table now is to look at a recommendation for the board to start a facilities master plan. But there's a lot of data that went before that about our facilities and the condition, not so much about the condition of those facilities, but how long this takes to plan. So I'll just stop there and see if there are any questions. And having no questions.
Oh, darn, I thought I was going to get a break for a while.
Okay, well, it's a pretty smart committee here. I think they're kind of up. You simplified it to my terms, so I kind of understand it. So I'm sure. It looks like Jim Negron has a question, or a comment. So I'll let him jump in.
So the comment that I have is, Stan, you did an incredible job articulating the information surrounding the need for moving forward with the process. I have an advantage being in the building industry, so I understand the importance of the data, and then the financial end of it articulated the sense of urgency as it relates to moving forward with it. So I know you were the presenter, but there was a lot of smart people behind you putting the information together. So kudos to everybody in the district that did the hard work to present such succinct, clear information for the need to move forward with the facility master plan. So, of course, I was part of the facility assessments a few years back, so I have some knowledge also of what the district has gone through. So again, that's why I put in my notes, I had a comment, not a question. So kudos to not just you, Stan, to the entire staff that did an incredible job putting the data together. So thank you.
Hey, thanks, Jim, for those comments. Yeah, I think it's evident that a lot of work has gone in to make this at least appear to be a simple process, and it took a lot of brains behind it. I think there was another a question from Michael Cole, a school board member, to ask Mr. Trevisino to go back through. Michael, you want to give him your question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just asking if Mr. Trevino can just recover again how many new facilities actually have been built. I believe it's over 40, but also provide project Fixit projects completed, if he can give an assessment of that. That was a lot that we were able to leverage in 2016 to afford a project Fixit. The idea kind of came from what we've seen with the city, that the city puts a quarter of every dollar away, for capital needs or needs wherever it is, but I believe it's largely capital. We approach this with the same type of mind frame, and I wanted to be able to share again exactly what Project Fixit has done in terms of completion. Where are we in terms of number of projects completed?
And just, pardon me, but Board Member Cole, the next hour of our presentation is all about Operation Fixit. So you're doing a great job on segue, even though we didn't ask you to do that, but that's coming up next. But if I don't know, maybe Alex could summarize a little bit about the buildings that have been touched, those that remain to be touched on the facility master plan, because you're going to see that they're from a capital perspective, there are two different areas of needs. The facility master plan being large, major building renovations, building construction type projects. And as we go to our next segment on lifecycle replacement, you'll see that there are more ongoing annual needs, maybe smaller projects, not complete renovations necessarily, under what we call lifecycle replacement. Maybe Alex could say something about on the facility master plan, and remind folks legacy buildings versus whatever we call the other buildings. Could you tell us about that? Because we often use that jargon, and I get lost in that sometimes.
No, thank you, Board Member Cole, for the question. That's a great question. So segments 1 and 2 comprise 35 facilities, and segment 3 was another 11 facilities. So in total, the district has completed 46 either completely new constructed or comprehensively renovated facilities through the facility master plan work. And to our treasurer's point, so we often refer to those newer buildings as our facility master plan buildings, and we refer to the other buildings as our legacy buildings. And so Mr. Treasurer is correct. So the whole next presentation will get into all that detail on the Operation Fixit and those life cycle renewals that we've been planning and working so hard on the past couple of years. And I'll give you very comprehensive detail on where we are with the progress on those projects.
Thank you, Alex. I don't see any other questions in the queue, so Stan, we'll turn it back over to you. Keep going.
Okay, thank you very much. So our next topic is lifecycle replacement. That's that center column of needs and projects on my chart. So we're going to talk about lifecycle replacement and what's all involved there. What do we mean by lifecycle replacement? That's the periodic, regular, kind of the renew and replace expenditures that we have. Equipment that has reached its end of useful life, Other items that wear out, like roofing, things that are obsolete. You can think of technology, window replacement, HVAC repairs and updates would be included here. But our best example of life cycle replacement is Operation Fixit. And Alex is now going to, in great detail, answer Board Member Cole's question about what did we do in Operation Fixit? Where are we? What were the projects like? What remains to be done? And then I'll come back on a little bit later to talk about more life cycle replacement current issues and what remains to be done around the district. So Alex, once again, if you could go ahead and step in and.
Fantastic. So Operation Fixit was approved back in November of 2016. It's funded by a $125 million bond issue focused exclusively on deferred maintenance across, again, I'm going to use that word, our legacy buildings. So those buildings that are everything but the new and renovated buildings of the facility master plan work. And it's a 5-year implementation plan. So it's a little hard to believe that we are approaching the halfway point of 2020, which is our 4th year of implementation for this program. So looking at all of the projects that we have planned, so again, focused on those legacy buildings, which are those 64 buildings that have not yet been through that facility master plan work. And the work is broken into 8 major categories. So you'll see numbers, so you're going to see these categories of work across your slides, but you'll see a number in that blue bar that represents the total number of projects planned for each of those project types. So the project types are roofing repairs, HVAC overhaul, which we're very proud to date that we've been able to air condition every classroom that we've touched so far through Operation Fixit, safety and security enhancements, fire alarm upgrades, plumbing upgrades, asphalt and concrete, lighting upgrades, and electrical system upgrades. In total, that comprises 389 projects across all of those buildings. So our first category of work is roofing repairs. So of the 31 planned projects that we had, 26 of those projects are complete. Only 5 of those projects remain to be complete, and they are all in construction at this point. So we have no projects left to start at this point. And in this picture, you're seeing work from this past summer at our North Linden Elementary School. And just to note, so the very last contract we had was for Medina Middle School's roof replacement, and it was awarded at the April 7th board meeting. Our largest category of work by far is those HVAC overhauls. So this work was planned at 45 of our legacy facilities. 25 of those projects are already complete. An additional 12 projects are in construction. These are projects that we had originally planned to be completed over the summer of this summer 2020, but we've been able to advance that work with not having physical classes in our school facilities. So we're in very good shape on those projects. And then to wrap that program up for HVAC, we have an additional 8 projects which are already in design, and those are projects that will be installed over summer of 2021. The criteria engineer for that project was already approved by the board back on March 3rd. Our next category of work is safety and security upgrades. So while we were not able to provide every category of work at every facility, this is one category of work that we thought was really important to introduce at every facility. So with some early research, we were able to determine that a pretty significant number of our buildings would benefit from the installation of a new security vestibule. The goal of that enhancement is to require visitors to enter the main office and sign in using our visitor management system prior to then being allowed to have free access to the building. To date, we've been able to complete this work at 20 of our school facilities. We have an additional 25 projects we are either currently bidding or are already in construction and planned for installation over summer of 2020. That will leave us with 19 remaining projects, which we will get under contract for design later this year, and those will be installed over summer of 2021. And in this photograph, you're seeing a picture of the security vestibule that was installed at Sherwood Middle School in summer of 2019. Fire alarm replacements was another focus of Operation Fixit, and it was one that we worked to advance as quickly as we possibly could, both to enhance the safety in our school facilities as well as to assist with HVAC overhaul projects because those two systems very much work together. So of those 34 planned projects, 24 of them are already complete. There are 5 projects that are currently in construction, and there are 5 additional projects that are in design. One thing that's noteworthy is if you've ever been in a building when the fire alarm goes off, most of our older buildings have that very large horn system that you're probably familiar with that makes it very hard to hear anything. So one of the enhancements we've been able to introduce is a voice activation system that will tone when there's an alert in the building, and then it will use a voice enunciation to allow our students and staff to understand what's going on. So if it is a fire or a detection of a fire, it will announce that there is a report of a fire in the building and indicate to those individuals they need to proceed to the nearest exit. But it also provides us with the ability to make live announcements as well as to play pre-recorded announcements, which we use to announce things such as tornado, level 2 lockdown, level 3 lockdown, or shelter in place. So again, all those projects are either already complete in design or in construction with none remaining to start. Plumbing upgrades was largely focused on our student restrooms. And looking at those 60 planned projects at this time, we have 6 complete, but we've got a big push to get this work started over this summer. So we have 27 projects that are in construction or ready for board approval to be installed over this summer. That leaves 27 projects. Again, we'll seek out design professionals for those projects later this year, and that's work that will be completed over summer of 2021. And in this photo, you're seeing the results of our renovation work in the restrooms at Highland Elementary School, which consisted of new toilet partitions, a new epoxy flooring systems, and general painting of the overall space. Asphalt and concrete. So 57 planned projects across all of our legacy facilities. Since summers of 2018 and 2019, we've completed 26 of those projects. Earlier this year, we received bids and awarded a contract for a indefinite quantity contract that will include up to 20 additional projects. That will leave us with 11 projects that we would plan to complete over summer of 2021, and design work for those projects will begin this fall. And in this photograph, you're seeing an aerial image of our Columbus Alternative High School site that was completed over summer of 2019. You can see that both the staff as well as the visitor and bus drop-off lots were all repaved and striped. I do feel like this is one of our projects that, at least when the work is initially complete, probably has one of the most dramatic impacts as you're entering our site. So we're pretty proud of this work. And then lighting upgrades. Again, this is another category of work that we included at every facility because it has a couple unique aspects. So number one, we know that doing lighting upgrades will improve the quality of lighting in our academic spaces, which we know can improve academic outcomes. It also provides us an opportunity to reduce our operating costs. So using LED technology, we've been able to achieve that. So we plan for lighting upgrades at all 64 legacy facilities. And through the leadership of our district's energy office, 46 of those projects have already been completed, with another 3 projects in construction, which leaves 16 projects remaining to complete. And unfortunately, this is one of the categories of work that just does not photograph very well. But what you're seeing in this picture is a new pendant light that was installed at Ridgeview Middle School. And then finally, electrical system upgrades. This is a category of work planned at 34 of our facilities to either update or replace the aging infrastructure at those facilities. And this is a category of work that very much goes hand in hand with our HVAC upgrades. So when we're adding new air conditioning to buildings that don't currently or haven't previously had it, we are always having to make this upgrade just to support the tremendous amount of electricity required to run an air conditioning system. So at this point, 19 of those system upgrades are complete. Another 7 of those projects are in construction. And again, those will be projects that are already also slated for HVAC upgrades this summer. And that will leave us with 8 remaining projects that would be completed over summer of 2021. So finally, I just wanted to conclude with some statistics that talk about the overall projects and the impacts we've been able to accomplish. So looking specifically at those lighting upgrades that we talked about earlier, we have been able to impact 2.75 million square feet of space. And we'll talk about this a little bit later, but in total, we operate about 9 million square feet of space between our academic and our central office facilities. So throughout this space, you're going to encounter improved lighting levels. You'll see more consistent color temperature of lamps. So I'm not sure if everybody notices, but one of my pet peeves is when you walk into a building and you see lamps and light fixtures that don't match. It doesn't result in very good optics down at the people level where the work is occurring, and it can just be distracting. So as a result of these LED lamp upgrades, we've been able to get very consistent color temperatures in our buildings and also much more consistent lighting levels. We've also been able to realize reductions to maintenance because these long life bulbs don't require replacement for a very long time. So to make this work happen, we contributed about $250,000 of Operation Fixit bond funds, and the Buildings and Grounds Department contributed another $150,000 in permanent improvement funds, and the remaining costs were covered through available grant funding and utility rebates. And I just want to point that out because the results are pretty dramatic. We're seeing an estimated $230,000 in annual electric savings across those impacted facilities. And as a result, we're expecting to have this investment fully paid back in about 21 months, which is really pretty remarkable. I also just wanted to go over some general highlights related to the HVAC initiative because it really is such a major impact across our district. So of those 25 already completed projects, we've been able to add air conditioning to 601 classrooms. In another 178 classrooms, there was already air conditioning that we were able to renovate and put new controls on so that we're getting better results out of those projects. So looking at the 12 projects that are in construction this summer, we'll add air conditioning to another 149 classrooms this summer and renovate another 178 classrooms that already have air conditioning. Understanding that we have a heavy focus this summer on renovations to our 1970s buildings that are already air conditioned. And then by the start of this coming school year, so August of 2020, we'll have added air conditioning to 750 classrooms across the district through Operation Fixit. And then finally, I know the numbers can be a little overwhelming, so we wanted to take a shot at kind of dashboarding what these projects look like across the city. So this is a map that reflects those 64 sites that have received work or are going to receive work in our final year of Operation Fixit. And you'll see that there's really a very good representation of these projects all across the city and representing every quadrant of the city. And I think at this point, I'll hand it back to you, Mr. Treasurer.
Thank you very much, Alex. And so that's what we've been able to accomplish with the 2016 approved funding in terms of Lifecycle Replacement. And I'm now here to discuss what additional needs are there today. Currently, it's estimated that we have about $500 million in deferred maintenance and in replacement for vehicles and buses and equipment, various infrastructure projects outstanding that there literally is no funding for. And I think you heard in Alex's presentation a facilities condition index. And while I don't understand that number, and because I'm the finance guy and he's the facilities guy, it's my understanding that that's an index that it is a metric used in describing the condition of your buildings, and you want to keep that at a certain level. And as Alex and I have talked about these our projects around the district, what has been impressed upon me is that in order to keep our buildings on an ongoing basis, in order to keep them at an index level that is kind of like industry prescribed, we need to be investing about $45 million annually in our infrastructure upgrades and maintenance and replacement. $45 million annually. And quite frankly, part of this, one of the main purposes or objectives of this whole presentation is to get across the magnitude, the size of the district. I'm not so sure that everybody really has a grip of that. And so that's a fairly large number, $45 million annually, just to maintain our life cycle needs throughout the district. What are some good examples of that? As Alex has mentioned, we operate 130 academic and support facilities. He just mentioned 9 million square feet. 9 million square feet throughout the whole district that we have to maintain in terms of infrastructure. He did note that nearly half of our buildings, our academic buildings, are more than 50 years old. And this was something that I found that I really didn't have a grip on. There are almost 1,500 acres of outdoor space. And that includes, Alex just highlighted some asphalt and concrete work. There's 1.5 million square yards of asphalt throughout the district. And I couldn't conceive of 1.5 million square yards. So we did some quick computations, and that would be like laying a 4-foot wide asphalt sidewalk from Columbus to Chicago and back. And yeah, to me, that's a lot of asphalt. Other examples of our replacement projects, we have about 6.3 million square feet of roofs across the district with a lifespan of about 20 years. We would need to be spending about 5.2 million annually for those roofing repairs and replacements. Other examples, aging heating and ventilating systems. We need to address those academic facilities not yet touched with capital monies from other sources. I mentioned roofing upgrades and masonry repair that needs to be maintained. Electrical and plumbing upgrades, we got to keep up with those to address capacity and reliability issues. We need to do some window replacement. You put in air conditioning in a building that has old windows, and it kind of defeats the purpose. Safety upgrades, always want to continue with those in terms of upgrading fire alarms, our closed circuit TV, security, and our building access control systems. Auditoriums, the seating, the stage curtains, the stage lighting, and the audiovisual systems to accompany that needs to be looked at and upgraded. We need to reach into the classrooms and address cabinets and flooring, the window treatments, the whiteboards and other furnishings in all of our classrooms throughout the district. And this is on an ongoing basis. This isn't just a one-shot deal. As we mentioned, repair and replace asphalt and concrete in parking lots and playgrounds. We need about 3.8 million a year for maintenance and to have planned replacement of those surfaces every year. We need to keep up and enhance our access to buildings based upon modern ADA standards. And let's not forget about all the outside space we have dedicated to our stadiums and our athletic fields, the football and baseball and softball fields, our tracks and tennis courts, and the lighting that goes along with that. That's very important to our overall academic program as well. Transportation. A while back, we brought transportation back into the district from being a contracted service and bought quite a few buses to start that process up again. We need to replace 71 of those every year to keep them reliable and up to date in safety features. You'll see here that almost a quarter of our buses are 15 years old or older. A new bus, $100,000 to $112,000 for a new bus. So on an annual basis, we need about $7 to $8 million just to replace buses. And we currently don't have that funding. On the vehicle side, other types of vehicles, we need 16 new vehicles annually to help maintain our district fleet of over 250 trucks, vans, and other service vehicles. And again, half of those are 15 years or older. So I'm sure some might ask, well, wasn't the $125 million Operation Fixit issue supposed to address those issues? Yes, but we knew at the time that there was a substantial amount of deferred maintenance that we just couldn't address at that point with an issue on the ballot back in 2016. And as I said, we're at 4 times that in deferred. So yes, Operation Fixit was a good start. You saw the progress that we've made from Alex and what he presented, but we need to continue to provide funding to protect the investment in the district's infrastructure. And here we are again with the recommendation. What is the recommended funding level? And I'll either take credit or blame for that, but it's a fairly straightforward calculation. As I mentioned just a couple slides ago, we need about $45 million a year to help pay for these life cycle replacement projects. And, you know, if we do a bond issue, it's really one and done. The $125 million was intended for Operation Fixit to give us a jump start on trying to chip away at that deferred maintenance. And so we got that 125. We did 2 different bond issues. We did $75 million to start, and about 2.5 years later, did the balance of $50 million. But that was intended to provide that cash infusion up front to begin all of those projects. But on an ongoing basis, on kind of a pay-as-you-go basis, we need $45 million annually. And if we could generate that kind of a stream, not only would it provide for annual funding of various projects, it also is a revenue stream against which we could borrow a portion and provide some of that upfront funding for projects that may be of a larger dollar amount that we want to do right now rather than wait down the road a little bit. So providing that stream of revenue would accomplish a couple of things for us. What millage is required to meet that $45 million annual need? Well, let's go back to that very first simple math formula that I presented to you at the very beginning. At our current assessed valuation of $10.4 billion, you know that 1 mill generates about $10.5 million per year. If you need 45, divide it by the 10.4 million and you get a little over 4.3 mills. For me, my recommendation is that we simply look at about 4.5 mills to generate 46.8 million a year to help address those needs. And again, it would provide us a revenue source against which we could borrow, as well as to pay for things on an annual basis. This borrowing would be much shorter term. It would be 10 years in duration. We could do that periodically over time, a lot lower interest costs. And there's a whole lot of things that we can do to be creative in funding these needs should we have a permanent improvement levy of that size to provide this revenue source. So I hope that this gives everyone a pretty good feel for the scope of our capital needs, the different ways we go about addressing those capital needs, the various funding sources that we have for that. Hope you understand what at least my recommendation is. I'm not looking for you to accept or adopt, but certainly to question those recommendations at this point in time. And you know, we can now have that conversation. We've gotten through all of our capital, which is good. We've got meeting number 2 to review this or discuss it further, or we can move on to our next topic, which would be academics. But I'm going to pause here again, see if there are questions or comments about what we've talked about now about life cycle replacement, and turn it back over to Mr. Miller.
Okay, sorry about that. I was trying to get back in the queue here. There are a couple questions in the queue, but I had one too. You may have answered it, but my question was about this $45 million. The $45 million, that's additional money that we need just for maintenance. I just want to make sure that's clear.
That is correct. And it's driven by the work that Alex's team has done in looking at the condition of our facilities, what it takes to maintain them at a certain level, and a long list of projects that are just waiting for funding.
So the question then would be, how much are we spending it on an annual basis today just to maintain? And this, with this addition, how much of an increase would that be? And what part would that represent to the total budgeted expenditures for that we're spending as a school system?
Right now, we have a $500,000 permanent improvement levy, which was approved in 16 in tandem with the bond issue. And that $500,000 generates approximately 4.8 million a year. So it's a tad bit short of the 45 million that we need. So that is going towards these life cycle projects. I don't know off the top of my head what is expended out of the general fund for this. However, over the years that I've been here, there's been a general movement to pull out capital needs out of the general operating and fund those with another source, like a PI levy, like a bond issue. And so while we pulled the expenditures or reduced the expenditures in the general fund, we did not have a readily available alternate source to fund for those, which then exacerbated this deferred maintenance issue. I would have to go back. I don't know that Alex knows off the top of his head, or I don't know if Mr. Oldham is, he might be online, but out of video. I don't know if they know that off the top of their head, but we'd have to, we could look at that in the general fund. But it is small by comparison to this annual need, I'm sure.
Okay. Well, yeah, I think we should get that, but I think Joellen, one of the committee's members, also has a question, so I'll let her ask her question. Joellen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I don't know if it's so much a question as it is a comment or maybe a concern, and that is it's almost a chicken and an egg or a cart and a horse problem, where we are talking about recommending an increase in funding or an increase in mills for funding facilities that are not going to look anything like they look today in the future. I cannot imagine a classroom with 50 students in it in the future. And that's one of my daughters is in a classroom that has 50 students in it. I think you're going to be hard pressed to get parents to send their kids to school if that's what they're facing. So I don't know if we need a facility plan or at least a thought about facilities prior to we're thinking about the money that we're going to need to generate to get to a place where our facilities take into consideration the needs of our students in the future, not just the way things used to be.
I think that's an excellent point. And that would be addressed through the facility master plan when you talk about class size and how the facilities will look differently in the future and how they align with the academic programming. And that's why we're so I'll use the word adamant that we start that facility master planning so that you can have that input and talk about, we don't want 50 kids in a classroom. We want it to look this way. And you're going to get some interaction with OFCC. They've got some ideas of what they think a school building should look like size-wise. I only know one piece of it, and I don't know why I focused in on elementary schools, but one of the questions is, how big do you think an elementary school ought to be? 300 kids or 700 kids? OFCC has a number in mind, and you may or may not like that number. And if you want to make a smaller school, you're fine with that, but that you'll end up paying for it. But anyway, I think your question is right on target with why that facility master planning process should begin. But that's just me. That's what we're addressing. Now, what we're talking about right now, the life cycle items, that's just ongoing what we need to do to maintain how we look today or how we look tomorrow. We're still going to be doing those roofing and asphalt and HVAC and equipment and buses. That's all going to continue to be ongoing. But when you talk about a whole different structuring of our physical buildings, that's FMP. Those are the big ticket dollar items there. So I don't know if that helps kind of put it in the right budget bucket, if you will, but that's how I conceptualize it. But you're absolutely correct.
Okay. We have a couple other questions in the queue. I'll just take them in order. The first one comes from board member Michael Cole, and this question is about our bond rating. So I don't know if you want to amplify that question more, Mr. Cole.
Sorry about that. Just wanted to ask if the treasurer would speak a little more, just a bit more in depth, not too much, but just a more in depth about our bond rating and where we are in position to be able to borrow.
We've maintained our AA rating over time, at least while I've been here, and the outlook has changed to stable from negative. Passing an operating levy certainly helps on that regard. We have never had any issues with accessing the debt market, but we are, just like any borrowing entity, susceptible to economic conditions. Here since the pandemic began, I was on a conference call seminar provided by S&P. It was a global call, and in general, I think S&P has blanketed everybody with a negative outlook because of the pandemic and its worldwide economic impact. So will that affect our access to the market? I don't know so much about access, but it could drive rates, certainly, as one could imagine. We're in discussions on an ongoing basis here with our municipal advisors. I'm concerned about potential cash flow implications and where we might turn for short-term borrowing if necessary, but we're working on that. I don't see anything alarming at this point, but I think we're in a good position to access capital markets if we need to.
Thank you. Continuing with the questions, Johanna Terrell, the committee member, had a question about technology. You want to ask your question, Johanna?
Yeah, sure. I saw technology in the column for the life cycle piece, and so I don't know if this is in relation to Joe Ellen's question earlier, but was technology mentioning the student technology based off of what we're seeing with COVID and having more opportunities for the kids? And I've seen a lot of what the parents were talking about as far as having technology for their kids to be able to learn from home. Is a life cycle technology piece in that category? Is that addressing that, or is that something that's also in the facilities master plan, or where are we looking to address, those types of issues?
Student technology could be addressed in either, and in the technology numbers that we've looked at, it's been primarily contemplated in the life cycle replacement numbers, simply because there is no active facility master plan, and those kind of needs exist and they're ongoing. So we want to put it in that funding stream so that if that's approved, we can begin to allocate dollars towards those expenditures.
Okay. We have a comment or question from Jim Negron. Jim, you want to go with your question or comment?
Yeah. So it's a point of clarification, Stan. So you had said earlier that we had currently levies of 7.2 mil, of which the actual value of that in today's dollars is 3.5 mil, which that's an inflation issue, right? So it's really, so we have the biggest portion of what we're looking for is just to bring things up to, what inflation has done to the revenue that we take in. Is that correct?
Well, not so much on the capital side. On the capital side, you drive those levies based upon need. And for instance, back in 2016, we were putting together three pieces in the operating levy, or in the request: operating millage, bond issue millage, and some permanent improvement dollars. And operating at that point in time came first. And what do we need for operating and implementing the programs that were proposed at that point in time? There were some millage constraints in terms of how much the board and those planning that were comfortable putting on the ballot. So to some degree, the funding that we could acquire was driven not necessarily by funding needs, but by what everyone was comfortable with putting on the ballot. So we ended up at about a total of 6.95 mils, broken down 5.58 operating, a half mil PI levy, and 0.84 average mills for a bond issue. So that all kind of melded in together, and the pieces and parts came together such that that's the kind of funding we ended up with. But from a capital sense, if we were to generate 45 million over time, yeah, the millage would go down because the assessed value would go up. But hopefully, for a long period of time, that would meet our needs to address those life cycle issues. The real reduction factor has impacted the operating millage, which is a subject for the next meeting or two about and you are correct in often because property taxes don't keep pace with inflation. You are correct. It's to replace some of that reduced tax millage, as well as to provide for increased costs for inflation and increased costs for new programming. Does that help? Thank you.
Thanks a lot. John Caniglio had a question about classroom size. John, you want to ask your question or make your comment? John, are you out there?
No, I don't have a comment. I just added something on that chat. That's all. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. We did have a question from Phil Callaway, the co-chair. You want to ask your question, Phil?
Yes. I think you already answered the question, but just to put it back out there, just for verification. You were talking about 45 million operational standpoint, and you had mentioned earlier in your presentation that if the levy was not added to the ballot on 2020, it would go to 2021 at a higher rate. Is there a secondary plan if the levy was not be able to be placed on the 2020 ballot? Is there a secondary plan to help generate or carry us to 2021?
So,
Hello?
I'm sorry,
can you repeat the question for everybody, Stan? I think there were some challenges getting if you
Sure.
heard it.
What I heard from Mr. Callaway was the question of, in part of my presentation, I talked about timing of a levy, when the taxes are received, and how that addresses, in that particular example, a projected deficit on the operating side. And I think his question was, in addition to that, do we have a secondary plan relative to capital needs if we don't go on the ballot, or God forbid we fail at the ballot? And I think I don't know if it's a secondary plan, Mr. Callaway, but I can describe the consequences on the operating side when we get to that conversation. If we either don't go or fail, you can see that raises the millage to cover a deficit or to pay for programming without having to delay those actions, without having to make expenditure cuts or delay the implementation of programs. So a delay in putting it on or a failure of an operating levy causes you to have to change your plans. Do we have an alternate plan? No, not at this point in time. On the capital side, it's similar, but it really doesn't change the millage. We're going to have a $45 million per year need in 2020. It's going to likely be the same in 21 and 22 and ongoing. So when we look at our capital needs, we're looking at that as an annual need on a longer term ongoing basis. So if we were to, let's just use my recommendation of 4.5 mils, if we were to ask for 4.5 mils in a permanent improvement levy this fall and it fails, I would simply repeat that next year. My alternate is to come back again, same millage, because I still need to change to generate those same dollars. Now, certainly next year, that it would be 2021, assessed valuation might be a little bit different. So either 4.5 mils would generate a little bit more in tax revenue, or we might be able to back it off and go for 4.4 mils, but I don't see any dramatic change in that request. But unlike operating, where you have such a limited period of time there, that 9 collection period or 7 collection period to address a deficit situation, this is a little bit more of a fixed cost, if you will, that we're trying to fund on an annual basis. Again, not a secondary plan in terms of behavior, but just a secondary plan in terms of how we go about asking for those additional dollars to fund the need.
Okay, one other quick comment is I think the, just the time we live in right now, the collection of property taxes by a lot of the, a lot of the forgiveness programs may delay or defer some of those collections as well. So that could be an issue. But I think to summarize to right now, we've got 2 recommendations that we want to make, or we want to consider making. The first one was the establishment of a facility master plan. And the second one would be recommended funding level for annual maintenance of about $45 million. So that's the culmination of what we've discussed so far. We've got about 20 minutes left, I believe, before we wrap up. So you want to take it back, Stan? I don't see any other questions in the queue.
Okay, thank you. I think you summarized fairly well. I hope that I've accomplished at least my goals to help share with you kind of the magnitude of this district and the size of the need and what it takes to maintain the district from a capital standpoint at the levels that at least I'm hearing that folks would like it to be. I think it was very clear with Joellen Klein's question that how our buildings look, that's a facility master plan question. And I hope you now have an appreciation that that's a long-term process that requires input not only from the state and a consultant, but certainly from the parents and citizens of the district, and that takes some time. We condensed it in 2016 to 6 months. Probably wasn't enough time. So that's why in the plan I laid out that we started and spend at least a year looking at that. But so you have an appreciation for that, and hence the reason for the recommendation. And on the life cycle replacement, one of the highlights is I'm certain to be is air conditioning, and we can't air condition the rest of the buildings without an additional revenue source. The $125 million bond issue had specific projects. They are obligated, and as you heard from Alex, those projects are completed or underway. And I think that within the next 18 months to 2 years, we'll be completely finished, and those funds will be depleted. The $500,000 levy that we have now that's for general use throughout the district is just, quite frankly, insufficient even to provide for the replacement and upkeep in terms of our bus fleet. And there were, I don't know, a dozen other categories of needs. So I think this in general just boils down to here's what your administration sees in the district. This is how we've costed this out and laid out in terms of anticipated projects, and we put a price tag on it. And I hope everybody has that understanding and appreciation, and it'll give you something to think about for a week until we meet again.
One of the things I was wondering if all the slides that were presented today, I don't know that they've been made available to all the committee members. I think there's a lot of information in those slides. Is that something that you could make available?
I absolutely will produce that in a PDF and get that out to everyone.
Okay, are there any other questions on the line? Do we have any other questions from committee members at this time? Michael, you want to make a comment?
Just a very short one. To add to what Mr. Trevino has alliterated to, and also what Mr. Treasurer has spoken on, the facilities master plan discussion in 2016 was probably 3/4 completed. So what we were not able to finish was the high school discussion. That was one of the reasons why we did not ultimately move forward. We wanted to be able to have that high school discussion as to specifically to Joe Ellen's comment about what does education look like moving forward in the future. Also to back up what Mr. Coneglio said about contracting and negotiations and class size specifically. There was very much a part of that conversation that was focused on class size, what that looks like, how we utilize space creatively. There was all of that put into play. Some of that you actually see if you go into some of our newer builds like Afrocentric and even a few of our smaller elementary schools. But I just wanted to make sure I did speak to that is expected to be a vital part of the conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that conversation is going to be based heavily also on what comes out of the academic discussion that we'll have 2 weeks out. We may start some of that next week if we are able to advance some of the conversations we're having around the facilities. But I think it's very important, and only Dr. Dixon has all those answers in her head. So, any other questions on the line? Anybody other comments? We're getting ready to adjourn.
Mr. Miller, just you all members have my email, so if you've got any questions in the meantime or want to make a connection with me over the phone, drop me an email and we'll trade numbers and chat between now and next Monday.
Okay.
That's what I was going to say. If you have additional questions, please feel free to follow up with the treasurer. And also, again, go through that information and talk to people that you know about it. Talk to the people that you're here representing. These are a big deal. This is huge stuff, and it's really important that we get a good perspective so the board can make the right decision at the right time for our entire community. So I just, again, wanted to thank you all for listening in and taking in all that information. And Stan did a good job, and Alex did a good job making a lot of complicated information pretty simple. So if you do go back and look at it and you're like, oh, that doesn't make sense, please reach out so that you have a good basis.
And we did get a great comment too that one of the committee members was thanking you and Alex, you, Stan, and Alex, for your great presentation. I think you did a really good job laying it out. I echo that comment that it was nice. It was easy to understand. It was presented in a really good format. And I think it gave us a lot to think about. I don't know if it makes the decisions or the thoughts any easier, but the information and how you laid it out was very, very good. So I thank you for that.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we stand adjourned, if I'm correct.
Thank
Thank
you
you very much
for your leadership, co-chair.
Thank you, and thanks for all your participation. All right, leaving the meeting. Thank you.
Stay healthy, everybody.